G'day and welcome back to A Kiwi's Perspective. Today we're going to be covering the recent Taxpayers Union poll, which has put New Zealand First in a very strong position, and the current right-leaning coalition government can continue to govern after the November election. What this means for Labour and why their biggest concern is no longer national. Let's jump right in and see what the numbers mean, So, as we can see here, we have the party vote and the preferred Prime Minister polls from the Taxpayers Union. And before we dive in, I do like the Taxpayers Union when it comes to polls. Generally speaking, they've been quite accurate in the public's perception. Not only that, but also the man running the show there, David Farrar. He has been quoted as New Zealand's top pollster from John Key during his time in government, and he was the most relied on person for their internal polling when making decisions on their policy and whether they're in a strong enough position to continue to govern. So when I look at a Taxpayers Union poll, I tend to take it a little bit more seriously than some of the other ones. In saying that though, one singular poll is never the take all. It is the pattern that is presented from the polls, and that's what we're going to be diving into today. So as we can see here, we have Labour sitting at that comfortable 33.4%, still a very strong performance. It is a little bit of a dip. It's within that margin of error though, that 1 to 3 points. The reality is that as long as Labour has no genuine policy on the table, voters will not be able to genuinely evaluate whether they want Chris Hipkins back in charge. And so we are not going to see any real movement between those low 30s until Chris Hipkins and the Labour Party have committed their major policies and how they will be dealing with being in charge if they were to be elected again. So we can most likely see that moving forward for quite a while. However, that also depends on how popular some of the other parties get. So let's just have a look. We have National sitting at that 29.8%, which is a far better result than some of the other polls that have been coming out recently. Some of them were as low as 26%, which is definitely not where you want to be if you're claiming to be the top party within your political sphere. The reality is that even though this is a better poll than most for National, that National should be in a far stronger position. This is their first term, and not only should they be sailing in those mid-30s, they should also have the preferred Prime Minister's poll in their favour at least till the end of the first term. And we are seeing here that that is definitely not the case, with Luxon being as likeable as a rotten potato, pretty much. It's kind of sad. I've met the man in person, and to be honest, he comes off as quite a nice guy, a very pragmatic man. But I can definitely attest to the criticisms of the lack of leadership that has come from Christopher Luxon and has been more of a party manager than a party leader. And we are seeing those results here. National still can't break 30%, even coming from the Taxpayers Union. And we can see that despite everything coming out from the COVID inquiry, and despite having no real policy to stand on, Chris Hipkins is cruising above him in the preferred Prime Minister's seat. So, that is what most people already know. I think what is most surprising from this poll, for those who haven't been paying attention, I pretty much predicted this in my first episode, which I do recommend you watch if you haven't seen it. But as we can see here, New Zealand First has skyrocketed up to 13.6%. Even within that margin of error, that is a huge jump. Generally speaking, in recent elections, Winston has come in towards the end of the election cycle, particularly within that last month, and that is when he's garnered that genuine support and he's been able to break through to get in to either opposition or with a coalition in the government. But as we can see here, he is now sitting at a very comfortable 13.6%. What we're seeing here is not only is New Zealand First scooping up the lost support from National, which to be fair, as we can see here at 9% for ACT, ACT is also getting some of National's votes that have been moved away due to the poor performance and the lack of keeping their promises as a party. But the reality is that New Zealand First is also scooping up those Labour votes now. What we're seeing here is the beginning of a snowball. We are now asking the question of whether is the kingmaker going to potentially be king. The reality is that if New Zealand First hits that 20% threshold and above, the conversation will no longer be who gets to be Deputy Prime Minister. Potentially it will be how much are we going to share of the Prime Minister's seat, or you make me Prime Minister and I'll let you do a lot of the other things. Who knows? We've never really been in this position before. We are going to see a 3-horse race this election. And that is a gap that has been opened up by what I would consider the political establishment. And that's what we're seeing here. We are seeing Labour starting to come down. National has come up, but they're not breaking that 30%. They need that 30%. If National is sitting in the 20s, that leaves them open to somebody like Winston rushing in and using massive leverage to get what he wants in the coalition agreements. And then as we can see here, we have the Greens shooting down to that 7.8%, which, to be fair, any policy that has come out of the Greens has been either we want to tax you more or has been more of a social argument than any real policy. So it's not groundbreaking to see the Greens in a weak position heading into this election, and we can even see that reflected in the clip that we'll be showing later with Chris Hipkins. We have Te Pāti Māori at 2.6%, continuing to be a disaster. They better pray that Labour and the Greens leave their Māori seats alone, because if they come after those as well, there's a good chance that they might remove the overhang in Parliament, which has been currently benefiting the left bloc for a reasonable amount of time now. And there's not really much else to say on Te Māori Party. They're kind of just in the shit due to their own poor decisions, and they were put in a genuine position to try and make change, and they have nothing to show for it, and their support base is reflecting that. Then we have the other, which I have heard a little bit about, the Opportunities Party. As I believe I've said before on the show, the Opportunities Party, from my perspective, don't really stand for anything. Every time I've heard an interview, it has been a process of trying to keep everybody happy and to be that middle ground, to keep everybody connected and in check, to put New Zealanders first. And the reality is that if you stand for nothing, you get no votes, and National are learning that the hard way too. So these polls are quite interesting to me, as it has produced New Zealand First as a potential third horse in this race. And if we see New Zealand First continue on this trajectory, it's not going to be a question of will he hit 20%. It will be where is he getting that 20% from. And if we see Labour dip below 30% and National head back down towards those 26, 27, that puts Winston in a very strong position to dictate those agreements. He will not be walking in. He will be storming in with a bunch of new MPs, and they will be dictating those agreements with the coalition partners. He's been playing the game a long time, and he's running circles around his opponents at the moment, and that is pretty clear with this recent poll. This pattern, as we can see along these lines in the party vote over time, is a continuous trajectory upward. We've seen the Greens kind of stabilise and head towards down. We've seen Te Māori Party continue to fall apart. We have seen ACT bounce up and down in popularity, sometimes being seen as the too divisive of the right. At least they have things that they stand for. And as you can see here, we've got National stabilising, But the reality is that this fuel crisis is not going to be helping them, and Chris Hipkins is somehow sitting in that preferred Prime Minister's seat, despite all the recent criticisms that have come out regarding not only his personal life, but also his handling over COVID. So I thought we'd also take a look at what this means for the seat layout, just to get a more genuine idea of what this would look like. So as we can see here, this puts the right bloc in a very generous position to continue to operate as a coalition government, pretty much courtesy of Winston. Labour is the biggest party overall, but the reality is that you need friends in MMP, and their friends are not doing very well. So let's jump into what Chris Hipkins might have to say about this. I think that this clip is very interesting and is worth the watch.
Chris, good morning.
Good morning.
So you need friends. That's the thing about MMP. You need mates, don't you? You need popular mates.
Well, there's still a lot of water to flow under the bridge between now and November the 7th. My message to New Zealanders is a very, very clear one, though. If you don't want this government to be re-elected, then vote Labour. If you're voting for any of the three parties in this government, National, ACT or New Zealand First, you're voting for more of the same.
It's funny, though, when the voters pull away from National, they are going to those very parties, not to you.
And they're voting for more of the same. Potentially with Winston Peters having a bigger sway in that government, able to run circles around Christopher Luxon even more than he has been. And I think there's a lot of National voters that'll be horrified at that thought.
So just notice how Chris Hipkins is, you got to vote for Labour, not the left, you got to vote for Labour, which is fair enough. It's his job to be promoting his party. And his isolation of Winston Peters. This is because Winston Peters is a very clear threat. Not only is a very clear threat to National and Labour, as he is now eating into both of their votes, but Winston has made it very clear. He refuses to work with Labour as long as Chris Hipkins is in charge. So what does that mean for Chris Hipkins? If we get to an election where they cannot govern without Winston Peters, and they are the only party that they're willing to negotiate with, that puts him in a very strained position with the members in his party. This is almost the worst case scenario for Hipkins. Strong enough to still keep the leadership going under his thumb, but weak enough that they will still require Winston to govern. And if that is the position that is, not only does that mean that the Greens and Te Māori Party are out, so it will be more of a centrist government more than anything, it also means that he would have to walk. Or, potentially, the compromise is Hipkins doesn't leave, but Hipkins doesn't become Prime Minister. And Winston takes that seat. Who knows? It's all very interesting now with Winston running as that third horse. The strongest he's ever been heading into an election. I don't think the question is whether he's going to get 20% or not now. It's where he's getting it from and how much beyond 20% will he get to. Anyway, let's keep watching.
Yeah, is it that horrifying? Because what is horrifying about it? What's horrifying about Winston Peters?
Well, look, Winston Peters is more interested in trying to create division, trying to turn New Zealanders against each other, than he is in actually bringing the country forward, bringing the country together. We've got some big challenges ahead. How the definition of a woman, whether English should be an official language, these are all distractions. We should be focused on the fact that New Zealanders are going backwards, that they need to...
Do you know...
So what he just said there sounds good in principle, until you start digging into the details of what he's actually talking about. Referring to defining what a woman is, that doesn't sound important to Labour, which is quite interesting to me because Labour used to be the party of women's rights. And if you don't think it's women's rights, well, let's just jump in, shall we? As we can see here, the Olympics themselves have announced a new policy to protect the females, women, in Olympic sport, And you can read this article if you like. I'll be linking it below. It's from the International Olympic Committee. But what I want to highlight to you guys is this here, which is the IOC administration was tasked with drafting a policy on the protection of the female category in the Olympic context that would reflect the findings of the working group on the protection of female category. Various IOC consultations and consideration of recent developments, including in international human rights law. That's astounding to me. We can agree globally that protecting women's rights is important, but when we try to do it in New Zealand, apparently it's a waste of time. That's a very interesting view to have for what's meant to be the progressive left-leaning government. And then regarding the English bill that he's criticised, funny enough, he supports it when he votes. Now, there's a lot of reasons why this is happening. Essentially, Winston Peters is trying to stop the erosion of the English language within government, and it turns out that English is not an official language in New Zealand, which quite surprising to me. I always assumed it was. So for this to be presented is actually quite fascinating. And I'll let you read through this. The link is in the description. But the reality is that Chris Hipkins will say one thing and then obviously do another criticism that seems to just fall flat. The reality is that not only is this a policy that he supported, but it's a policy that, generally speaking, the public supports. They thought it was always this way. So for Winston to come and tidy up the paperwork is just obvious for him. But anyway, let's keep going, eh? I'm sure there's more for him to say.
Well-paid jobs.
Yes, but what's funny...
They need to be able to afford to go to the supermarket. That's where our focus should be.
What's funny, though, about you bring up the what question, I don't think the question... Well, I mean, it wasn't even him that asked you. I think it was Sean Plunkett. But it was your answer that made it into the news, wasn't it? Because you sort of, I don't know, you went blank for a while.
Oh, Ryan, look, you have to be naive if you don't realise that this is part of a culture war that's happening from the populist right all around the world, who are more interested in convincing people that these are the major issues that are ruining their lives and making their lives difficult, rather than the fact that, the cost of living is going up. We've got people making very, very good money off that at the moment, while most people are struggling. Most people are finding that, things are getting tougher. They don't want you talking about that. They prefer you talking about the culture wars, which is a territory which they think they can win elections on. I don't think that's what elections should be about.
Okay, fair enough. So
the interviewer's loving the say, you could see that he was genuinely holding in his laughter. This might be one of the few times he actually gets to go after Chris Hipkins. I don't know. I don't really watch a lot from the Herald. I do find it very interesting, the evaluation that Hipkins has produced. And to be fair on him, that's good politics. Winston Peters has aligned the more polarizing parts of his coalition agreement to come out in the last year of the coalition government to align with election year. That's just good politics, mate. That is how you do your job effectively. It shows that Winston's been playing this game for a very long time and he knows what he's doing. That is why these article-grabbing bills are being produced towards the end of his coalition cycle, which is also most likely why he demanded being the first Deputy Prime Minister, shared between David Seymour, so he could spend the second half preparing this campaign, which once again, smart as hell politics. Anyway, let's keep going, eh?
If you're saying Winston Peters is the head of a culture war populist right movement, will you rule out working with him?
Well, you don't even need to do that. Winston Peters has already been very clear. A vote for Winston Peters or for New Zealand First is a vote to re-elect this government.
No, he has left the door open to Labour so long as you're not leading it.
No, he hasn't. He's basically
Yes,
ruled out
he has.
with Labor.
No,
He's
he
basically
hasn't.
he has said that a
Okay.
vote for him is a vote to re-elect this government. New Zealanders should take him at his word. When
Okay.
somebody tells you who they are, you should believe them.
New Zealand should take him at his word. His word being my word. You should take him at my word, which is that is not something I need to do because he's already done it, even though he's clarified multiple times that he would only refuse to work with Labor for as long as Chris Hipkins is in charge. It's quite fascinating to watch this, because the reality is that the more that is said, the more likely they'll roll him. So let's just keep watching out. This is a fun interview.
All right. So in that case, who cares? The door's been closed on you. So you're saying you won't work with him either because he is a war populist right-wing politician.
Well, we will set out our position.
Oh, come on.
That's what I've said. Right.
This is absurd. Come on.
Well, I've also said, Ryan, that I ruled out working with Winston Peters last time, and that's highly unlikely to change.
Okay. All right. We'll take that.
It's highly unlikely to change, but but I'm not going to say it. And they're having a blast with this interview, because he just has to wiggle around that question, because the reality is that he can't say no. He can't say no to Winston, because if Winston continues on the trajectory he's in, they're going to need Winston to run Parliament. And the more bad faith, the harder it's going to be to get him to switch sides, which, to be fair, he has done before. But it's just quite funny watching Hipkins squirm like this. It's always enjoyable.
As Chippy doesn't want Winston either. Hey, the golden visa, would you guys keep it? And the associated property rights for visa holders, properties worth more than $5 million. Have you got a policy on this yet? Will you keep it? Because it seems to be bringing in money and doing well.
We're waiting to see the evidence. So what we want to see is more active investment in New Zealand. So if this is resulting in active investment, that's something we'll look closely at. If it's resulting in passive investment, i.e. people just parking their money in New Zealand and not actually contributing to our economy, then that's not so good for New Zealand. So we want to see the evidence here.
So something like 98% last time I spoke to Erica Stanford is going into investment funds which are being invested on behalf of those people in New Zealand. Would you consider that active investment?
Very much depends what kind of investment fund. So if they're basically just parking up money that they could do from anywhere in the world, and they're parking it up in New Zealand because it's a good place to invest and they're stable and safe investments, there's little evidence to suggest that the golden visa is what's contributing to that. On the other hand, if they're putting it into things that are helping to grow businesses, then we're interested in having those conversations because we do want to see New Zealand businesses grow.
The Indian FTA.
So before we continue, once again, no real answer here. We don't want to produce our policy position regarding it. The reality is, though, is that if we do jump into what this is doing for them, we have seen a genuine influx of revenue coming into the country. And it's not super substantial considering our massive budget that we spend every year. But the reality is that this money is going directly into funds that are available to then invest in our economy. And even Stuff have to admit it. Like, the reality is that we produce almost $3.5 billion in less than a year. And just for context, that's the requirement of the gold card. The requirement of having that golden visa is that you not only can afford to buy a $5 million home, but you also have to bring in the resources to invest into businesses, whether that's your own business or the funds to do so. That is fundamentally a good thing. There's a lot of arguments around the availability of housing, whether if you buy too many houses that are worth over $5 million, it artificially pushes up the rest of the housing market. And you can dive deep into that, don't get me wrong. And that's what Hipkins could have done here, but he didn't do that. He just said, we're going to wait and see. We're going to see if it's popular enough to hold it through to make sure we win the election. It's just, it's so fascinating watching one side of the aisle being national, stand for nothing and losing the votes, and then Hipkins standing for nothing and gaining those votes. I really hope New Zealanders, by the time the election rolls through, really start to understand the implications of just jumping between the two major parties every election and how that is fundamentally hurting us as a nation. All right, let's keep going, We're gonna tackle a little bit more.
I know there's been back and forth between you guys. Apparently, there's Macleay is going up to India at the end of the month. Have you come to an agreement yet? Are you kumbaya yet?
We're still waiting to get our formal response back from them. We've had there were several meetings last week where we were able to access some of the official advice that the government have received. They haven't given us all the official advice, and they haven't actually asked us what they haven't actually given us the bill they're asking us to support. So we're still waiting for them to come back to us.
Have you given them an in-principle decision?
No, we haven't.
Okay. All right. So you're genuinely serious when you say you might not vote for it.
Well, there's goodwill. We're trying to find a way forward here. We're very concerned about aspects of what the government have been telling New Zealanders that the text of the agreement doesn't seem to support. And so we're trying to get to the bottom of that. The government are being very cagey with us, as they are with the New Zealand public. The statements that they're giving us contradict what we've actually read in the paperwork that they've given us. So we're trying to get to the bottom of that.
So, another example of Chris Hipkins not committing. And he's blaming everybody else, it's never their fault, it's always somebody else's fault. But the reality of the situation is that if he actually commits to this trade agreement, there will be more bad faith between Labour and Winston, New Zealand First, if they genuinely have to make a coalition to govern. The reality is that if he picks a side, then that makes that harder. And I don't know about you, but being so flip-floppy because of how nervous you are of your own seat is not how a leader should be acting. Either step aside for the betterment of the party, or hardline, exclude Winston. This is under my leadership. This is what's happening. You can't push us out. And if you refuse to work with me, then you are refusing to work with Labour, and I refuse to work with you. And that put that stick in the sand. But as we can see with even the trade agreement, they can't commit to that either. So it'll be very interesting to see how they manage themselves over this campaign. Because the reality is there's a good chance they're going to need Winston now, especially if he hits over 20%. And where does that put Hipkins specifically? We'll just have to wait and see. But anyway, one last thing for today. I just found a very interesting comment that kind of summarizes how people are thinking in a particular echo chamber regarding New Zealand First and their shoot up in the polls. And I just thought I would feature on the show because it kind of spoke to me in a kind of funny but also sad way. So let's just jump right in, shall we? So, as we can see here, we have Resist NACT First, which I assume was made because of the recent coalition government. And this is what they have to say about Winston. There are two reasons Winston Peters and his shitty party are going well in the polls. He's picked up the half-wit, COVID-idiot, anti-vax, Nuremberg, two morons by appealing to their infected fantasies. There's a solid cohort of identity politics Tory voters who know they made a huge mistake backing National, but their Tory brain worms can't let them consider any of the opposition parties, and so they've brought the idea that Winston is standing up to the mean establishment. So my response is there. I think it's the top comment actually, which is quite funny. I think this says more about how you view the world than those supporting Winston. It's kind of sad to see, to be honest, which it is. People who are so stuck in their echo chambers that they can't have a critical, nuanced discussion of why things are going the way they are. The reality is that if you can't stomach Labour, which a lot of people can't, where else do they have to go on the left? They just don't. You expect them to go to the Greens if they can't handle Labour? Considering what the Greens have been up to recently, tax, and social politics. if anyone who is playing identity politics, it is not the right. So that's quite fascinating to me to see. And obviously you have Te Māori Party, which has just imploded in on itself. So where are they meant to go on the left? So then they look over at the right block. Who's over there? We got National, which if you're not considering the two major parties, you're sick with both of them. And fair enough, you had one of them that lied you through COVID and then spent all your money, and then you have another one that continues to lie and spends all your money. So fair enough, where else can you go? So you look at ACT. And ACT can be a lot to swallow for some people. They have some pretty strong positions that they hold dearly, and sometimes can be considered very polarizing, and I understand that. There are things that I do agree with when it comes to their positions. As an example, they wanting to actually reduce spending within the government. The fastest way to reduce inflation is to reduce government spending. That's just 101 economics. I recommend you look into Argentina's success in restabilizing and producing growth within their economy after being in a far worse position than New Zealand pretty much has ever been in. So I recommend you go into that rabbit hole. And then you look at New Zealand First, the only nationalistic party that is genuinely, whether you agree with their position or not, is genuinely trying to bring the country back to a position that it used to be in, which is wealthy and able to support people and actually have the funds to do things like pay for infrastructure and not having to continue to borrow all the time. So when you put it into that context, it becomes pretty clear why people have started moving towards Winston, especially with the current circus going on in Parliament right now. A weak National is the best thing for Winston. The second best thing is a weak Labour. And Labour haven't been particularly strong, considering they've got no policies to stand on, other than potentially taxing people more. So that's going to be interesting. So that's just what I wanted to share with you today. And thank you for your time in this episode of A Kiwi's Perspective. If you liked it, please show your support by liking, following, subscribing. It puts me in a better position to continue these conversations. Our goal is to get to 100 Facebook followers so that we can start doing live streams and I can start interacting directly with the viewership and having these conversations more genuinely and more back and forth to get people thinking. Because that is my goal with the show, is to get more people thinking about what affects them on a day-to-day basis. Because the reality is that if we're not involved, then they're going to take advantage of that. And that is what I would argue we are seeing today. But anyway, hopefully you guys have been staying safe out with the weather. It has been kind of chaotic recently. And I hope to see you next time on A Kiwi's Perspective.